Action. Hello, welcome back to Show and Tell. I'm Billy, and this is a podcast about vintage knitting. We usually talk about garments that are based on patterns from 1920s through the 1950s or 60s. Sometimes we break those barriers, and sometimes the patterns are not original vintage, but they're adaptations of vintage patterns made a little easier for the contemporary knitter. So not everything is knit flat. Sometimes things are knit in the round to make it easier. In any event, that's usually the focus of the show. But because I have a myriad of other interests, sometimes I take you traveling with me. Sometimes we look inside of museums or do something musical. You just never know. It's almost always nostalgic because I'm a nostalgic person. Today, though, I do have a guest. So in a moment, I will be back with Sara. While I'm connecting with her, take this opportunity to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this type of content. And don't forget to like and feel free to comment below. All right, so I am back with Sara. She's going to tell us the correct pronunciation of her name, but take it away and tell us, please, where you're from and a little something about your city that if we were to travel there, which hopefully someday soon we'll be able to do again, something that's there that we might like to see that wouldn't be known to typical tourists. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, in Swedish, my name is Sara, but you can say Sara, Sarah, whatever you want to. And I'm from Sweden. I live in Stockholm, and yeah, I was thinking about that. What kind of places would I take friends from other places to? It would probably be, well, I would take people to the Nordic Museum, but that's well known. So another place is the Hallwylska. It's a building. It used to be a home for a family called von Hallwyl, and it's kind of eccentric house, and they all have exhibitions of different kinds. Sometimes there are costumes from different areas, or it could be about psychics or anything. Just, and it's a small museum in the center of town, so it's easy to reach and very nice.
It sounds great. I'll try and get this spelling from you so I can put that in the show notes for people. But yes, anything that might smack of vintage is going to be welcome for viewers of this channel, I think. Okay, so I don't know too much about your knitting, but I know that you have some things there on a rack that you're going to show us and on the dress form. So I'm just going to let you start to talk about your knitting and where you're sourcing these patterns from. Are they all Scandinavian? Are they all Swedish? Are they written in other languages? It seems like there's a lot of color work there. So take it away. Just tell us whatever you want to tell us. They look fantastic.
Thank you. I knit from several sources, and I'm not always historically correct, I must add, because I adjust the patterns to fit my size and my shape, and sometimes and the materials from today and the colors sometimes. But I'm always inspired by colors from ages ago, so it's kind of correct. And I knit from Swedish patterns, Norwegian patterns, in English. I can knit from French and Spanish as well, but I haven't seen many vintage patterns from those countries.
Wow.
Yeah, but I've tried. It's quite easy. But there are some really good Swedish knitting patterns, actually. And I can show you some of the Swedish for the Nordic knitting, different kinds, and also some of the British patterns and American patterns. So, and I prefer Actually, my own style is more 60s. I prefer the 60s style-wise, but I think the knitting patterns and the knitted garments were much better in the late 30s, for example.
The late 30s?
Yeah, or early 40s, because in the 50s, in the 60s, there were thicker yarn, and I'm a fine knitter. I knit with very fine yarn because I'm very fast and I had too many garments. So I think you talked about that in a episode yourself, that you want to be to work slower on your garments because you have too many garments.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the same for me. And I like the finer knitting. So in the 60s, mostly thicker yarn. And in the 50s, you need to be really slim to fit into those garments. And I'm a medium-sized Nordic woman of today, so that's not really possible. It would be a strange shape for me. And in the 40s, they were a bit too boxy for me. But in the late 30s, I think the patterns were exactly a little bit wide, but not too much. A bit fitted, a bit wide. That's the good size. But I also adjust them a lot.
I've never had any of my guests break it down like that decade by decade, but it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. I know that Sophie, one of my guests, said she loves the 30s because she likes all the little attention to detail.
Yeah,
but I have a feeling that it's probably about the fit as well. And then I had another guest, Julia. I think she's more of a 50s knitter. And she talked about the undergarments, the corset type things to wear underneath to get that good shape. But thank you for that tip, because maybe now I'll start to look more with a careful eye to get those late 30s, early 40s. I mean, I like that period in general, but yeah, I do. I very much do, because I love everything Art Deco.
Yeah, me too. I love Art Deco, the colors and everything. And I, of course, you should go with your style. If I was wearing dresses from the 40s, I would knit only 40s cardigans, but I don't. So I mix a lot. So that's why I go by shape instead. So maybe I can start with some of the.
Yes, please.
Yeah. And I also love Fair Isle. That's another thing you will see in here. And I've been to Shetland and I have lots of vintage Shetland yarn. So many colors. So I can show you that too. Maybe I should start with the Nordic knitting. I only have one Swedish, no, two Swedish. This is from a Swedish pattern. I think it might, I don't know the year of this, but it might be late 30s, early 40s as well. It's in this one. It's an old one, knitting book. The Swedish one, Kajsas stickbok. And I found a pattern in there. So I made this one. And the yarn is also actually called Sara. So it's very suitable.
It's very different from what we usually see. It's not like typical Fair Isle. It has a very unusual motif.
Yeah, it has. It's more. Yeah, it's much more Nordic or Scandinavian. Actually,
I like it a lot.
Right part, the West.
And the buttons, are they buttons or are they snaps?
Buttons, and they also vintage.
Can you get the button really close to the camera so that we can get a good?
I don't know if it's focused enough, maybe. No, it's not. Anyway.
Yes, you can see that it has little, like a starburst, very pretty.
I have a button collection as well, so.
I'm envious. I don't want to collect anything, but I definitely want to have an array of buttons to choose from when I'm looking for a button. So I know a lot of people have these button collections. I don't have the inclination or the space. But I know who to turn to.
Yeah. And this is a Swedish pattern. This is very different. It's Bohus knitting, and it's from the 1940s.
There's a lot of colors going on there.
Yeah, there are many colors. And the back is just gray, and we can buy some of those patterns in a book or online, but most of them are licensed to a museum in Sweden. So you have to get a kit, pattern and the yarn together. And it's lovely. This is lovely lamb's wool, but usually it's Angora or, yeah, wool or Angora. They're very nice. And this is not a typical style, but I like this because it's very retro and colorful. So.
Show the buttons again, if you don't mind.
Yeah. You can get a good picture there, yeah. And the special thing with Bohus knitting is that you use pearl stitches within the color work. I think you can see it here. So it makes it a bit
texture.
Yeah.
So there's a little texture to it.
I think you can see, yeah, maybe.
It's hard to see.
Yeah, it's hard to see. But there are some pearl stitches here along with the color work.
That must keep it really interesting while you're knitting. It's enough for many of us to pay attention to the color changes, but when you have color changes and stitch changes happening at the same time, you better be on point. You better have a lot of coffee that day.
And there are photos of our famous actress Ingrid Bergman in a sweater with this pattern.
Really?
On internet, so you could find a photo of her in that.
I will look for it. You think it's just out there on the internet? I should be able to find it easily.
It is on the internet.
Oh, I'll look for that. That would be wonderful. Oh my.
Yeah, sure. I made a cardigan because I'm too warm for sweaters actually. So I need to do cardigan, but it's this pattern. And this was in a part of Sweden called Bohus on the west coast. And they were quite poor and they need to get money to the families. So the women were given the opportunity to knit for the fashion industry in this pattern. So they were sold in Paris and etc. So it was not for anyone to wear these pattern garments.
Does that have anything to do with the variety of colors in it? Was this like scraps of yarn that were available, or it was deliberate?
I don't think so. They were probably given a yarn from the company that was working with this. They worked for them. So I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Well, it must have been a big relief when you got to the back and you didn't have to think about anything.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And that's very nice as well. So that's another typical Swedish garment. I think this company called Bohus Knitting was there for around from late 30s to late 60s. They made these patterns. So that's one of my favorites, this one.
It's one of your favorites because of the style of it, the look of it, or it's one of your favorites because it was so interesting to knit?
Both, maybe the style mostly and the colors, because I like the red part. It's called the Röda Randen, that means the red stripe, and it's very striking when you wear it, so I like it a lot.
Thanks.
So, and I can show you some Norwegian. This is a Norwegian pattern. I'll show you on the back. And I use Swedish yarn for this. And the buttons are glass buttons from Paris, or France anyway. I bought them from Paris from the 1920s.
Try and get them really close to the camera
Yeah.
so we can get a close-up view. Oh, yeah.
So,
That
this,
also looks like it must have been very interesting to knit. Are there charts? Are they using charts, or is it written out? You know, knit 7 white and knit.
started because it's in a modern book that have where there are vintage patterns and old traditional Norwegian patterns. And I'm not sure if it's available in English, but I can show you. I brought a book here. It's called Kofteboken, and it's in Norwegian. But it's charted, and I remember what was a bit annoying with all those long floats. There are really long floats here somewhere, 17 stitches or something.
So are you catching the floats?
Yeah, I am catching the floats.
Are you using 2 hands, a color in each hand?
I use 2 hands. That makes it so much easier. Both knitting and catching the floats and keeping the colors in the right place. So you have the same color dominance all through the garment, because I put one color on each side of my legs, so I know where I put it, where I keep them. It's much easier. So that was, but I like it a lot. The medium.
I can only imagine with having that pattern all over the sleeves and the front and the back, how much work that was. But it's great. I mean, it's great for people who are losing their mojo. I think this is a great way to get your knitting mojo back, because you really have to pay attention. And I think it would consume you to do that. Actually, it goes great with what I'm wearing. Maybe you could send it to me over the internet and I could model it today.
Yeah.
I love that one. It looks really like good work. Good job.
Yeah, I think because I think it's very fulfilling to do one row at a time, and you can see the fabric grow and the pattern grow. I like that.
I think for the people who were knitting back before things were charted, that must have been even more the case. I mean, I've seen some old patterns where there's no chart and it just tells you knit 5 brown, knit 7 yellow, and then you don't know what you're going to get. And if you're 1 stitch off, the pattern doesn't emerge correctly. So you have to pay very careful attention. You can't really see what it looks like until you've finished several rows, and then, oh, maybe there's a stitch out of place, heaven forbid. But it is very exciting to see the pattern emerge.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's why it's so interesting. Stranded knitting is so interesting.
So people out there, if you haven't tried this, I encourage you to do it. Even if it's just in a hat or mittens or gloves or something small, I encourage you, because it's a very different experience from just plain stockinette, solid color.
Yeah, and if you're knitting round or if you knit flat, because I do both depending on the garment and the pattern. So I actually sometimes prefer knitting flat because it gets more tailored. You can make more. For me, it's easy to see the pieces of a garment than if I'm knitting in the round. So I think it's much easier but I know most people prefer knitted in the round. And that's a thing with Norwegian patterns, because they were usually knitted in the round even before. So if you find an old Norwegian pattern, they're mostly knitted in the round.
That reminds me, I have to dig out. I have sweaters that I bought my first trip to Europe in the early 1970s. And I probably have something from Norway or Sweden that probably is knit in the round. I might have more than one. I haven't seen them in my closet for a long time. They're on the bottom of a bin, but I should think about pulling those out.
I can see that when, like in Facebook groups where there are Swedish and Norwegian members, the Norwegian people, they always knitting around, and in the Swedish people are more used to knitting flat traditionally. So there is a difference. I can show you another Norwegian pattern, actually from the 60s, so it's much thicker. This one, it's Shetland yarn. And the buttons are actually a bit, they are matched with the pattern because they're also round. You see, well, there is a circle within the button. And this is a Norwegian pattern as well, more modern, knitted flat, but in one piece. No, I actually knitted this flat. I had to look at it. But it's Shetland yarn, but it's very Scandinavian one. Okay, I can show you some of the fair art. Well, I can move from Norway to
whenever you want.
This one is it's a Norwegian. It's supposed to be Norwegian style, but it is actually a British pattern. And on the back, it's very traditional with the birds and the man and woman and the heart shapes there. And this pattern, I got this from an Australian friend on Instagram, but it's supposed to be Norwegian, but it is a British pattern. And like some of the vintage patterns, the instructions were not so clear. There were nothing, they didn't describe the back at all. It was just knit as, yeah, you know. So that was really strange. And so I had to frog this a bit and start all over again and try again. But I'm really happy with this because it's a bit, yeah, it's very stylish.
But the V-neck, that is part of the pattern, or you adapted the pattern?
It's part of the pattern. And there are pockets as well.
I saw those little pockets.
You can't keep things in there, but still, yeah.
That's another thing that's kind of fun to do if you've never done it before.
Yeah.
A little pocket.
It's not that difficult, I think. It's not so hard.
No, if the instructions are good. I've made something that was vintage with a couple of pockets, actually. Yeah,
so
breast pockets.
But mixed between Norway and the British. But this is very Norwegian to have these spots here. Dots.
Do they have a name for that? I've heard people call them fleas.
Luser in Norwegian. Yeah, that's least. Yeah, that's right. But these are a little bit different, but still you have those things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this one is from the late 30s as well.
How long have you been knitting? How long did it take to knit all of these? Each one of these has to be many months.
This was not so bad, but because okay, I had to re-knit the sleeves a few times, but anyway, I've been knitting for my whole life since I was 7 or something. And I knitted my first sweater when I was about 11. not vintage though. Well, it's vintage now,
Mhm.
but it wasn't vintage at the time. Yeah. And
But
also
of
use
of the sweaters that you're showing us now, how many years worth of knitting would you say that is?
all together. I
Yes.
started knitting. I have knitted for many years, but I didn't knit standard knitting until I went to something called Friends of Handicraft in Stockholm. I attended some courses there for 2 years in the weekends. And my teacher told me you should try knit, because I always find it's a bit wobbly and ugly. I wasn't good at standard knitting. And she told me you should try knitting with both hands. And when I did that, and I had to practice for a while, and after that, everything is just smooth sailing. Even on the pearl side, it's working. So those are maybe, I think all of them are within 5 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm a fast knitter, as you see, and I knit a lot. And this is vintage Shetland yarn. And this was not charted, but someone had charted this. Someone on Ravelry had charted this. Thankfully.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was much easier when I followed high chart.
Well, that gives me an opportunity to plug a video that I just made on stitch fiddle, about stitch fiddle.
Yeah.
If you have something that hasn't been charted and you want to create a chart, I did a little tutorial on this website called Stitch Fiddle that I walk you through a little bit how you can do it and how you can put all those colors onto a chart. Yeah, it definitely makes life easier.
Yeah, Stitch Fiddle and Shopminder. I use both of them depending on the project. So that's another one. And this was the first Fair Isle cardigan I made. It's also from the late 30s. Also with Shetland yarn.
And a cute button.
Yes, flowers. Yeah, you can see flowers.
Those are perfect for the little brown motif.
Yeah, it's the same. It's almost the same color, and it's kind of the same shape.
Yes,
So
excellent.
I was really happy when I found them.
It's that attention to the little details that really makes the difference between having something that's professional looking or not.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, I make lots of mistakes, and I don't always correct them. But the most important thing is the details. Yeah, I agree.
Do you
can't
have
see
any?
the mistakes if the buttons are perfect for the.
Do you have any tips about how to get your button band to not bow? Yours look pretty straight.
Yeah, I have usually in vintage patterns, they are knitted together with the body, but I don't do that. I always knit them separately because I think they are much better. Yeah, they fit much better if you knit them separately and sew them on. For me, that's much easier. And you need to stretch them because they must be shorter than the garment. They can't be the same length because then they will be wobbly. Some of mine are wobbly anyway, but I try to keep them straight.
I
prefer them separately. It's worth it.
I passed a shop in my neighborhood and it's geared to young people because there's a university very close to where I live. And I took a picture. I'll see if I can find that picture and put it here. This is a machine-made garment hanging in the shop window where the button band is just wobbly and at the bottom, it's not a smooth edge. And I thought, I wonder how much they're charging for that sweater. It's probably not inexpensive, and it's really poorly done.
No, it's not a
Yes.
sheet hand, so they should do it properly.
Yours
Yeah.
looks like, masterful, expert.
Thank you. And I also made this from Susan Crawford's book, The Vintage Shetland Project. This took a while. I think there are 18 colors. And the yarn is vanilla by Susan Crawford as well.
I'm knitting something as a knit along with a group of people right now from that same vintage Shetland
Yeah, I saw that.
project.
Yeah.
And it's 9 colors, and I'm overwhelmed a little bit by that. 18 or 16? What did you just say?
I think it was 18.
18.
I don't remember.
So twice
Yeah,
as many. Wow.
And at first, when I saw them lying on, because some of the colors are quite bright, and I'm not used to some of those yellow, for example, or the blue that's kind of electric. But so when I saw all the yarn on the floor, I was like, no, this must be, it can't be right. But when you knit them together like this, it's like kind of, yeah, it's harmony anyway, because even though there are many colors. And that's the beauty with Fair Isle, I think.
Do you know how long it took you to knit this one? Because I'm estimating that it's going to take me a good 100 hours to knit the one that I'm working on, which has no sleeves, no collar.
I don't know really. I've never really counted, but I was working on this for maybe 8 months or something, but I had parallel projects as well, so not the only one.
Is that typical of how you knit? Are you working on multiple things at the same time?
Yeah, mostly 2 or 3. I don't want more than 3 because then I get it's stressed, and but 2 or 3, yeah. But probably just 2 garments at the most, or maybe a shawl or a pair of socks or something, or mittens. I knit a lot of mittens as well, so that's why. And I found the perfect colors for the buttons, this one as well. I tried for a long time. Should I pick a color? Should I pick one of the 18 colors? Well, then I found this brown, quite simple buttons in a shop. They are not vintage, but they look fine with this anyway.
Was that also a gauge of 46 stitches to 4 inches? Do you remember?
No, not 46. It was maybe 32. I don't remember really, or maybe less.
Because our thing that we're doing now, the genie, 46 stitches.
No,
so that makes it very slow, which I'm very happy about, very content.
No, I think this was not that high, maybe lower than 30 even, because I don't remember, because she I think in some of her patterns in the book, or maybe many of them, she changes that the size changes are mostly because you change your size of the needles, not the stitches. You just change it so it gets a little bit looser.
Oh.
And I like that because this one is not so warm like some of the others.
Just how you're waving it around, it looks very drapey, very fluid. So I did imagine that it was a very dense knit.
Yeah, but it was good. Yeah, it was a good experience. So I could recommend this, even if it takes a long time and there are 18 colors. And she has color suggestions for both Fenella and Jameson and Smith. So you can find you don't have to knit in this fine yarn. But I like it a lot. But then the pandemic came, so I haven't I haven't had the opportunity to wear this really, because I'm mostly staying at home. But I'm going back to work next week, so to the office, and I will be wearing this. And then I'm also doing, I think, this one.
Oh, solid color.
Yes, solid color. And I like the pattern on the structure on this one, because it's not so romantic, it's more like geometrical.
Whoops.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah, it's the same style in the same color family as well. So this is one of my
Good
favorites.
taste.
Yeah, and I found the perfect button for this, because they are lighter green, but it's the same green color as the yarn in the middle. There are lines with the same green colors. So I was really happy with that. And this, yeah, I don't know where this pattern came from. I found it probably on Etsy, because I find a lot of patterns on Etsy as well. There's PDF patterns. That's one. And then I can show you one more. This is also from the 60s. Another one from the 60s, and with the lace pattern. And it has a bit of mohair in it. It's a very thin yarn with a bit of mohair. And some vintage buttons as well.
Super pretty.
And this is very wearable. I can wear this with dresses or anything, because it's quite light and not so warm. But it has a typical horseshoe pattern. So that's another one.
Extraordinary. I mean, it's extraordinary to have a collection like that. Each one is just formidable.
Thank you.
And you want to say anything about the one that's on the form behind you?
Yeah, of course, I could tell you about that one. This is it's actually a sweater pattern from the late 30s, I think. But I made it into a cardigan. I just added a few stitches to make it symmetrical at the front. And changed the color a little bit as well. And it has a structured, I can take it off her nudity on. But anyway, it has a structure, you can say. Yeah. So it was very, very easy in it. This is Susan Crawford's yarn, Excellana.
Well, it's very interesting to have cables plus that horizontal banding intersecting it. It also looks like that has pretty buttons too. Wow.
Yeah, there are vintage buttons as well. So I sometimes go for the same color and sometimes for something that stands out on the cardigan, because I want to show, and because this cardigan is a bit more basic, I wanted something different, something to pop out.
I think it's a good choice. I think they're all good choices. I didn't have any objections to any of them. They were all just right, just so. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I feel like a slacker. I feel like I should just get back to my knitting. But I'm happy that I'm not the only person who's intrigued by slowing it down and having less output, because how many sweaters can one person wear? Unless you're happy to knit them and gift them to other people. I know there's a woman in my apartment building. I used to see her at the knitting shop I went to many, many years ago. And I ran into her recently. I don't see her that often. And I said, are you still knitting a lot? And she said, yes, but not for myself. She only knits for charity. I think she just reached the limit of what she could fit in her apartment and what her own personal needs were. Now, are you able to wear sweaters all year long?
No, not this summer because it's been very warm. But I'm happy to live in this case, happy to live in a cold country. So during the winter it's fine. And even in the office because it's cold at the office. But since we've been sitting at home now and I have a warm apartment, so I haven't used them a lot.
None of the sweaters that you showed us are really heavy for a cold winter. It gets cold in Stockholm. I mean, I have something here that I'm going to be doing another video pretty soon. That's why I have these on hand. But this is worsted, and you can see by how it's draping. This is thick. So on a very cold day, this is what I want to be wearing as opposed to this, which is thin.
Yeah, and we have warm jackets as well. So it depends on what you want to wear and where you are. Many of our houses are warm, so we don't need to wear them inside. So that's why. But still, I wear them a lot, and I prefer having lighter jackets and a wool underneath. It's better.
I guess whatever works for you and your climate. I just would have expected bulkier worsted weight, but
most people
maybe the heating is really cranked up. We have heat, of course, but we also have quite a few windows, and our windows are old and the cold air leaks in. So even with the heat on, I sometimes do want an extra little layer. And of course, if I go outside on a chilly day, I want to have something that's heavier. So I'm knitting everything from lace weight to Aran weight, actually, for one bulky sweater.
I mostly use lace, or fingering is my favorite. Fingering or light fingering is my favorite.
I think I'm into fingering too, like a size 3 US needle, which I think is a 3.25 or something for you, something like that. It's like Goldilocks's porridge. It's not too thin, it's not too thick, it's just right. That for me, a size 3 US needle, it just hits the spot. It doesn't knit up so fast. It's not 4 stitches to the inch, but it's also not 12 stitches to the inch. It's sort of like middle of the road, and it's nice. It's enjoyable for me. Anyway, thank you so much for sharing your collection with us. I hope that my viewers enjoyed this, and please give it a thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time. So long. Thank you again.